It's been a few days since patch 10.7 has dropped, so the natural thing to do right now is to get started on our tier list. As always, we're going to be giving you guys a snapshot of all the lanes as well as one highlight from each of the tiers. Make sure you smash that like button and destroy the sub button, and let's jump right in. Keep in mind that our tier lists are sorted based on win rate, play rate, ban rate, and of course we also take difficulty into account. Why would I recommend you play somebody more difficult when you can get the same results playing somebody who's easier? We're looking to give you guys the best edge that we can with this list to give you relevant information on who you should be looking for to get the best results right now. But let's get in, let's jump into the mid lane here and go over the broken tier, which is Nocturne? Didn't that guy just get nerfed? Well, yeah, he did, but for some reason, Nocturne mid is actually performing better than it has on any other patch before this. Maybe the nerf really prompted some people to start trying him out or something, or maybe people just realized that it's really broken. But let me put it this way, Nocturne and Wukong mid have just about the same pick rate. Nocturne is actually a little bit higher. And I mean, we've had a fair amount of content covering Wukong. That guy is seriously strong right now. And Nocturne is actually close to Wukong in terms of his performance. Keep in mind that all this happens after he got nerfed. So like, what's up with that, dude? Initially, I thought it might have had something to do with the Blade of the Ruined King buff, but that's not even an item that the best performers buy. Not quite sure what the reason is at this moment. However, Nocturne mid is strong. The statistics don't lie here. But as we move down to our S tier highlight, let's keep in mind about Nocturne being the number one, right? Let's talk about Wukong. Wukong was notoriously broken on last patch and had ridiculous win rates, over 55% in 3 different roles, top, mid, and jungle. However, right now, it looks like the monkey business going on in the mid lane is taking a bit of a backseat. Once you hit gold, Nocturne mid starts outperforming Wukong mid just by raw numbers. Beyond that, once you hit platinum, the difference between the two is massive and Wukong isn't even in the top 10. Because of that, we're comfortable saying that Wukong is definitely still an S tier pick. He's good, but is he ridiculous and broken level? No, definitely not, especially when compared to Nocturne. Taking another step down into A tier, thinking about Nocturne and Wukong at this point, let's talk about Garen. Garen was another champion who was performing ridiculously well in the mid lane, and it took a couple targeted nerfs to really take him down a notch. Now, Garen is performing at a pretty good level. Is he anywhere near as ridiculous as he was before? No, so naturally he's gonna fit underneath champions like Nocturne and Wukong. However, don't be afraid to pick him as a counter pick to certain spell-reliant melee mid laners. And always keep in mind that Garen actually scales surprisingly well and can easily overtake a lot of people in the middle of the game. He's one of those champions with spectacular 1v1, split push, and tower pushing potential that can allow him to overtake games before the enemies really get a chance to start scaling super hard. Moving down to B tier now, you'll notice that a lot of the champions here either are sort of one-trick pony, so to speak, where they only focus on one thing, like Malphite really only playing around his R every single time is up and not offering much else, or a champion like Lucian, who is a lane bully that if you don't execute properly, will easily get you smashed in the later stages of the game. These champions definitely aren't bad, however they are middle of the pack. But while we're here, let's take a moment to highlight Victor. Victor's a really interesting champion who does need some time to scale, but once he gets there, is actually incredibly annoying. Recently, Riot changed Victor's hex core so that once he gets it fully upgraded, all of his abilities will slow whenever they hit an enemy. This makes him incredibly annoying and his stun almost impossible to avoid. If you do manage to get past the early game with Victor, you will notice that you have a profound impact on the game. Having that sort of on-demand CC and constantly up CC is really powerful. Anytime you Q somebody, you slow them. Anytime you hit them with either part of your E or your ultimate, you slow them. And remember, these abilities are mostly AoE, so it's not like you're only good at 1v1ing, you have plenty of teamfight potential as well and wombo combo. Next tier down is C tier, and here we're gonna highlight Corki because he actually just got a buff. Despite the fact that Corki did just get buffed, he is still not a good champion, and that's why he is below average. He can very easily get destroyed in the early game, and he'll have a tough time against plenty of popular mages right now, as they either have a ton of CC or just far more burst damage than he can ever hope to resist. The Hex Pilot just doesn't have enough explosive power in his kit right now, or in any of the items that he likes to buy to really justify being picked. Everybody else is just kind of better, except for the D tier. And with the D tier, we have to once again take a look at Akali, which at this point is basically just tradition. The champion still does not exist and has a sub 45% win rate. Absolutely brilliant. We'll have to see how Riot manages to resolve this in the near future, hopefully. she doesn't get ignored for like a year. That'd be nice. And with the D tier being wrapped up, we've fully completed the mid lane. So without further ado, let's jump on up to the top side of the map and go over our top laners. First up, the broken tier. Wukong shouldn't come as a surprise. However, Maokai is just about as performant as him right now. And I mean, honestly, is this really surprising when you take a moment to think about it? Think about how many people have been nerfed lately that are top laners. Darius got the axe recently. His mana cost made him have some real troubles up in the top lane. Ornn got a similar treatment. He got nerfed. Garen got nerfed. Singed got nerfed. A lot of champions got nerfed who were very, very strong. After all these people just fall over and don't really have the performance that they used to, somebody else has got to rise to the top, and Maokai is that champion. He's been really stable and rock steady for a long time, and now with everybody else having a little bit less power than normal, he gets to shine. Maokai has great CC. He literally has a CC on every single ability in his kit. He's got a slow on his Q, as well as a knockback, a root on his W, a slow on his Z, and a root on his ultimate. His whole kit literally screams crowd control. But a little tip when playing Maokai, make sure that you don't get obsessed with rushing a Spirit Visage or getting Spirit Visage as your first MR item. At that point, you're kind of just committing too hard to your passive healing being what really makes you tanky. You'll find yourself more often than not getting countered by a simple 800 gold Executioner's Spy. The real recommendation here is to grab yourself an Abyssal Mask, especially if you have other magic damage dealing teammates. It gives you health and mana, and Maokai absolutely will have mana problems if you don't build any, and even if you do, you'll eventually run out pretty quickly. You throw saplings left and right, and your Q is incredibly low cooldown. But let's take a step down from broken tier and into S tier, away from the sustain gods. Who's up next on the chopping block? And if you thought Darius, well, my bad for baiting you, but actually we're going to be talking about Kled. If you aren't playing Kled, you seriously should be. This champion has been strong for a long time now, and he has really good diversity and the ability to fit into a large amount of team comps. You could totally go a normal, standard bruiser Kled build where you have a Black Cleaver and a Titanic, but if you want to, you could also do something crazy, like getting an Essence Reaver and doing tons of damage. On top of that, Kled synergizes really well with Enchanter supports and Engager supports, both of which are pretty good right now. On top of that, he's a great asset to a lot of junglers, as he's extremely hard to kill, and his dismount mechanic makes him really easy to play around. Oh, and the dismount mechanic itself makes Kled a 2v1 machine. You can easily remount in tons of ganks that are targeted at you. Honestly, Kled is one of those champions who's really truly 1v9. Or really, I guess if Kled was going to describe it, it would be a 1v1v1v1v1v1v1v1v1v1. Kled's a bit of a weird guy. Anyways, let's move on into A tier. The A tier highlight here is going to be Nasus. He did recently get a really nice quality of life buff and a big buff to his E. The E buff to Nasus might not seem too significant, but trust me, especially as the game starts to scale and enemies have more and more armor that he needs to get through, having 45% armor reduction is going to be a huge asset for him. On top of that, in the early game, 25% is nothing to sneeze at either. When he's hitting harder all the time, I mean, it's going to be a big noticeable difference. On top of that, the W extra range that he gets is really important. Very few champions can now actually outrange a Nasus with her, and that's a big deal. That thing caps out at like what, 96% slow? That's ridiculous. Since he can catch that many more people out, and even people who have rapid fire cannon, it means that they're no longer safe or anywhere near as safe as they were in the past. Moving one step further down to B tier, our highlight here is actually going to be Akali. She is a champion who, if you don't dodge her E, you kinda just auto lose the lane, and it can be really frustrating. It's difficult to have the right blend of abilities to actually be able to deal with Akali, especially if she has tentacles up and you can't really contest them. The amount of healing and damage that she could do with those, especially in the early game, is more than most people can handle. And I mean, really, fighting against her is kind of like playing Minesweeper. You have so many tentacles that you need to dodge and keep track of, and a lot of the times it just becomes overwhelming and you're not exactly sure what you're looking for. What I can tell you is that running away every time she pulls you with your E is not always the right answer. If you can't afford to stay in there and try and shove her off of your spirit, that can be really beneficial to you. Her E does have a pretty lengthy cooldown, especially in the early sections of the game, so if you could take advantage of her while she doesn't have her cooldowns off because she's mispositioning or trying to trade with you for some reason and doesn't have everything, then go for it. You'll be able to beat her into the ground. Going one step further into C tier, Taking a look at Jace this time, he has been performing below average, let's say, for a while now. However, with the new death stance, it seems like he's actually got something to go on here, especially when you consider the fact that he can take advantage of the buffs to Blade of the Ruined King as well. If you happen to be in a matchup where the Blade of the Ruined King movement speed steal is really nice for running people down, or even just a lifesteal is great for you in the lane in general, then by all means, you could totally build it. And the new death stance, Jace often suffers from the problem where he's not tanky enough to do the damage that he already has, and that's a common thing for a lot of fighters, and the new death stance with its resistances is really helpful for him. And then once again, coming down to the very bottom of the trash can where all the juice accumulates, we look at Akali once again, think of her former glory, think back to mid lane, and realize, ah yes, of course, top lane is no different. It is important to point out though that Akali, just to not be misleading, is a lot better in the top lane than she is in the mid lane. While they are both in D tier, if you had to choose one, top lane would definitely be the way to go. And there's a lot of reasons for that, partially because of how her mobility works, how she likes to trade, what the long lane means for her and her ability to snowball. And if you're actually looking to learn some things like this and how to abuse concepts like that in order to give yourself a huge lead and win your games, then you should go check out our website, GameLeap.com. We've got tons of guides and all of them are made by challenger level players, and we have guides on just about anything you could want. Like I mentioned earlier, we have guides that focus on macro skills and things that you can abuse in a micro sense in the middle of your lane, no matter what lane you're playing in. On top of that, we also have champion guides and more stuff like basic skills and other things for you to practice. But with the top lane wrapped up, now we can get to my favorite segment, the Bush Boys. Finally swinging all the way back to his natural habitat, Wukong is our broken tier jungle highlight. And yeah, you heard me right, Wukong. You might be thinking, wait a minute, hold on. Isn't he like super smashing top lane and also was smashing mid lane? And yeah, you would be right, he was. However, jungle Wukong has not slowed down at all compared to the other roles from his nerfs. To give a quick numbers example of what I can see here right now live on u.gg, Wukong's win rate from last patch to this patch in jungle has changed maybe about 0.5%, while top lane and mid lane have dropped like over 2%. That is a fat change. And considering that despite the slight drop in performance from the nerfs, which of course will affect jungle Wukong due to the fact of how important armor is for many junglers, even all of that combined against him, he is still outperforming pretty much any other jungler that exists right now just on stats alone. And this is actually another champion who we went over in our most recent Korean builds video. Seems like jungle Wukong is actually getting a lot of popularity and seems to be the role where he might fit best. Now of course, that is a big call to make and we've only had him for so long. We'll definitely be waiting for more results and data to see how he's performing until we make a call like that. But I mean, hey, for now, if he's strong and really just smashing the competition, he is definitely broken tier. That is certain at the very least. And as we swing our way with the king of the jungle out of the vines and on top of the tree branch, we're going to be looking at our S tier highlight, which is going to be Shaco. Shaco was really strong last patch, and don't get me wrong, he still is right now too. But is he really that broken tier? No, we couldn't quite justify keeping him up there ever since he's not really been performing too hot since Wukong seems to be taking over the jungle. Of course, there are other reasons too, and one of them could definitely be the more popular Graves build that we've been seeing, or really any champion who just happens to take Umbral Glaive. Being able to sweep away traps really makes Shaco's life a lot harder, especially if you're playing him as AP Shaco. Despite all the challenges though, Shaco is definitely performing well. He might not be broken tier anymore, but don't let that fool you, he is absolutely still S tier. And as we slide our way off of the tree branches and down the bark all the way down to the jungle floor, let's talk about the A tier highlight. In this case, let's talk about Echo, who is somebody who has pretty quickly fallen from grace in the jungle when he was really ridiculously strong not too many patches ago. Really, this is mostly due to the fact that there was a large shift in the jungle meta, accompanied with the fact that Echo did get a nerf to his jungle clearing. Put two and two together, and eventually people realized that lane Echo is just a lot more valuable and a lot more consistent. While you definitely can destroy games with Echo Jungle, just keep in mind that you really will run out of gold if you aren't consistently snowballing, winning fights, and taking objectives all over the map. And considering that Echo's objective taking is okay, he does have a good shield for it, but his damage isn't that great. And couple that with the fact that usually Echo wants to be diving the backline and not really sitting on objectives, you don't really get to take advantage of the fact that he's super good at diving thanks to his super safe R. Oh yeah, and of course, how could I forget? If you're using your W to tank save the dragon, then you don't have your W to try and stun the enemies or absorb any of their damage, and that really sucks. And now that we're on the jungle floor, as we shift our way through the shrubbery, we're gonna find some people hidden in the bushes, and these are our B tier highlights. And in this case, it's highlights plural because we're gonna be looking at two different champions, Sylas and Jax. They both fill pretty similar roles. Sylas does amazing damage and has great utility from being able to steal opponents' ultimates. On top of that, his W healing is ridiculous and makes him one of the kings of skirmishing. As far as Jax goes though, he's somewhat similar in the sense that he has pretty good damage and great TPS, and he can heal a lot if he has Conqueror, or really just even a Death Stance if he manages to buy that in the jungle. Both of these champions like to dive when it's in their favor. They're not going to dive 24/7 because if they do, well, they're just going to get punished and killed most of the time. Because of that, they are very scrappy, skirmish-oriented junglers, and they do sometimes need to get a lead in the early game in order to really express their power over the game. They need a lot of money and they really need to get scaling, and so if you manage to shut them down or they just don't get anything done, then you're probably in a pretty good spot and you don't need to worry about fighting against them. And if you're playing that champion and you're in that position, well then you need to start making stuff happen. And now that we've made it through the underbrush of the jungle, we can look at the base of the trees and see the mushrooms that highlight our C tier highlight. In this case, let's talk about Set. Set has a problem where his nerfs were really bad for the jungle. They hurt his jungle clear and his jungle sustain and his ganks all at once. Now that's not to say he's not playable, but he is borderline below average. If you manage to get out of the early game and you shut down your opponent or manage to get a sizable lead for yourself, then yeah, you're probably gonna be fine. But you will need even more than the previous B tier champions to really be able to take over a game. But I mean, hey, when you do, you can pile drive just about anybody anywhere and they're probably gonna die alongside two of their other teammates. And lastly, the moss on the rocks that grows next to the mushrooms in the jungle shows us very clearly our D tier. And here our highlight is Fiddlesticks. This champ had so much promise in his rework. However, when I saw him on the patch, I was like, okay, this is gonna be real cool. And then unfortunately, it was the exact opposite of cool and quickly became a disaster. Fiddlesticks is underperforming, and he definitely needs more than any sort of hotfix buff could ever give him. And as we exit the jungle scenery, we find our way into the bot lane, and let's talk about AD carry. So something that was very interesting to me is that Yasuo has overtaken the bot lane in pretty much every rank, and it's not like his stats, either his ban rate or his pick rate, are really lacking. They're not really any worse than any of his other counterparts at the top of the AD carry ladder. He just brings so much value, and considering that we even have stuff like Fasting Senna where you're playing with a support and Senna's just trying to poke people over and over again, doesn't really surprise me that Yasuo is good. You see, Yasuo's flow shield is very powerful, and being able to take advantage of it over and over again to block a lot of damage is really important for being able to survive through lane. Combo that with a wind wall and you should basically never take damage in lane at all, even if you start getting later levels like level 6. Most champions' ultimates in the bot lane can be blocked by Yasuo wind wall. And really, even if you're playing one of the few champions where that's not an option, chances are he just beats you into the ground anyways. He's a pretty convincing pick and definitely showcases what a broken tier highlight for bot lane should be. But as we take a hop, skip, and jump downwards into the S tier, you might notice that we have Misfortune and Senna grouped together nicely. These two champions have been strong for a very long period of time, and I'm kinda glad that they aren't just top dog period now anymore and somebody has actually finally overtaken them. But besides that, their companion, Jhin in S tier, is our highlight because he has suddenly exploded in popularity, performance, and hasn't really gotten on anybody's ban radar. It really seems like Stormrazor Rush Jhin is really putting in work right now, and honestly right now where there are a lot of squishy supports around and people who are prone to getting caught out, having that Stormrazor slow first thing in the game to really set yourself and your team up for either your W or extra CC is pretty damn strong. Just don't get carried away, you are still a relatively immobile AD carry, and if you step out of position, well, you're gonna feel the pain. Taking another step downwards, moving on into A tier, our highlight here is gonna be Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw is a really interesting champion. While his performance at the very highest ends of the ladder isn't really all that great and shouldn't be noted, elsewhere he is really performing well, and it makes sense. The amount of high HP targets that are in a lot of games right now is sky high. There really hasn't been a time where there's more people who have high health and lower resistances than right now. Because of that, Kog'Maw just gets to shred through everybody who steps in front of him. And even if there are people who have healing skills like say Sylas, if they're not able to one-shot the Kog'Maw, Kog'Maw's just gonna melt their face off. Because he has this always present threat, he really puts pressure on the enemy team to kill him, and if they aren't able to, well, they're just gonna lose. Hopping our way into our next highlight in the B tier, let's talk about Kalista. She had a lot of popularity in solo lanes because she was able to hop around and kite people around and really abuse her trading with minion waves to destroy people in solo lanes. But beyond that, people have started trying to take her into the bot lane again and are actually having decent success. While her performance isn't anything crazy, and we'll have to see if this is sort of a bubble that bursts and it's really just kind of dumb luck that most Kalista players are winning their games, it seems like she's actually slated to perhaps be even higher than B tier and might sneak her way into A tier. This is actually a really hard call to make, but we're comfortable putting her in B tier, and if she's a little bit stronger than that, then that's okay. For the past several tier lists that we've had, the C and D tier have remained pretty much the same, and here it's no different. Heimerdinger and Xayah are in our C tier, as Xayah isn't really all that powerful without Rakan, and while she definitely has her own merits, she is not the greatest pick if you're looking for a solo carry champion. Heimerdinger, on the other hand, is a really strong champion and can pretty easily 1v2 people. However, if you do get overwhelmed, you very quickly become useless and fall behind. This is the main problem with these C tier champions, and for D tier, once again, Corki, why are we even considering him for AD carry? And then just move on because he's garbage. And now that we've wrapped up AD carries, let's talk about supports, which for the first time in quite some time, it feels like AD carries aren't super reliant on what their support is playing. And the same goes for the opposite. The support choice doesn't seem to be all that contingent on what AD carry is picked. This is actually really good for the game, in my opinion, as you can really just play whatever you want and whatever you find enjoyable, and obviously if you want to play something strong, that's always an option to you as well. Beyond that, the diversity is really nice and just spices up games in general. Realistically, there are very few really bad AD carries and really bad supports. But for now, let's show off the tier list and talk about our broken tier. Bard and Nami are at the top, and these two are absolutely demolishing everybody else. And while the margin isn't as huge as it used to be, it's definitely still there. They do edge out about a 53% win rate right now on the patch. Bard and Nami have two things in common. They are incredibly difficult champions to catch. Nami has her bubble, all of her abilities that she can use on herself will give her movement speed and could potentially slow enemies down, and on top of that, Tidal Wave is a knockup, and knockups are very powerful, and she has a slow after that as well. This is a pretty hard CC chain combo to get away from. As far as Bard goes, he goes zoom through his portals, and I mean, what are you gonna do? Try and chase him? He'll just Q you as soon as you come out of the portal, and then you're just stunned and took a bunch of free damage for no reason. Beyond that, he's also got his own W heals, which he can either eat instantly for the extra boost of movement speed and little top off, or he could have planted ones waiting for him to really just top off in lane. And I mean top off. Bard healing is actually insanely strong. And if you don't believe me, go into practice tool right now. Take a couple tower shots at like level 5 as Bard, and go pick up 3 of your healing shrines. And now imagine that you could do that several times each lane without really having to recall thanks to the Chime mana regen. I think by now you probably get the point. So now let's move on to the S tier supports. In this case, I think it's actually really worth it to highlight Maokai, because a lot of people seem to think that Maokai would still fall off as a sort of cheesy support pick that wasn't really all that good, but instead we've seen the opposite trend. His performance has been getting better, or at least staying the same. Despite having all these positive trends, nobody really seems to be picking him up, and while nobody is a strong word, that is absolutely not true. However, nowhere near as many people as somebody like, say, Nami. Maokai does have amazing CC, pretty good sustain that is relatively easy to proc, and honestly, there are some bot laners or supports that are very good for Maokai to fight against, as he can easily rapidly get his passive. Now that you know Maokai's strengths, let's take another step down and talk about A tier. For the support A tier, let's talk about Thresh. Thresh is a champion who really excels at catching out champions thanks to his hook, and he also has really good zone control because of his Flay, his Lantern, which can really save allies in bad situations, and his ultimate, which has the heaviest slow in the game, the old 99%. If you are very confident with your ability on Thresh, you will definitely hit more skill shots and feel like you're performing better. One of the things that's hard to grasp about hook champions, but especially Thresh, is that if you aren't on the same wavelength as your opponent and you're not predicting them and you're not having a good time, you need to actively break that and start to think the way they are thinking. If you aren't finding patterns and really making the right guesses, then he's gonna feel underwhelming. And right now, he doesn't have enough that he can offer if he isn't hitting hooks basically 24/7 to really brag anything more than at A tier. But then moving down to B tier, let's talk about someone who, in my opinion, has been an underrated support for a long time and is only now starting to get the recognition that they deserve. I, of course, am talking about Vel'Koz support. Vel'Koz support is a very interesting pick, because you are effectively saying, I want to win lane, and not only do I want to win lane, but I want to make it so that nobody, and I mean nobody, as long as they are alone, can ever step into my jungle without dying. Vel'Koz offers a ton of burst damage as well as great DPS as long as they land their abilities. If you happen to land the dream full combo and hit pretty much everything, including your ultimate, you're going to be doing a lot more damage than most people can survive just by their raw health bar. The amount of true damage that you put out on top of anything else that you have is really going to devastate people. Obviously though, Vel'Koz will require some coordination and probably a different team comp than you might normally think. Not to say that these are exact requirements, but they would definitely make the Vel'Koz's life a lot easier and thus up their efficiency. Moving on to C tier, our highlight here is going to be Rakan, because much like Xayah, Rakan has fallen from grace, and while they are, when together, pretty good, alone and separated, they really aren't having a great time right now. Rakan, despite being one of a really unique support engagers, has not been able to find a good foothold in this meta. He finds himself getting stifled way too much by people like Janna and others who have disjointed CC, the ability to outrun him, or just really ruin his day. And unfortunately, if there's too much of that in the enemy team, he just doesn't really have a lot of options. And then lastly for D tier, although we have historically highlighted only Tahm Kench, we have a new contender in the D tier, and that is Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks support is actually doing even worse than Fiddlesticks jungle. Now while the margin is pretty small and this could totally change within the next day or so, them being both at just about 42% with support being even lower is kind of funny to me. You're not going to be getting too much out of Fiddlesticks support right now, and until people really try and figure out and actually successfully figure out what to do with this champion, he's probably not going to be good anytime soon. But since you very well may be waiting for that day, then why not go check out our website, GameLeap.com. We have tons of guides on champions, macro guides, micro guides, things for you to practice, generic lane tips, and more. Everything that we have is made by challenger level players, and we're always working with our content creators to make more and better content for you guys. We're trying to give you guys the best edge that we possibly can in order to help you win and improve in your games. So make sure you go check us out to give yourself that advantage. If you made it this far, thanks for watching the whole video. This tier list was a pretty long one compared to some of the others that I've done, but honestly, a lot of the meta was shaken up and many things got turned upside down in some ways, so I'm kinda glad that I've managed to take the time to really highlight some of the changes here. Anyways, as always, my name is Ace Windstorm, and I will see you all later.